The 2024 summer box office is just around the corner, so what better way to kick it off than to predict every top 10 highest grossing film at the domestic box office. So obviously with this list, it's completely money based. This is not the movies I am most anticipating. I am not predicting the quality of them. If I was, trust me, this would be a completely different list. This idea is taken from the Filmcast. It's a game that they play every single summer, and I always like to play along. So to qualify to be in the summer movie wager, it has to be a wide released within the time frame of the first week of May up until Labor Day weekend. Starting at number 1, I believe the highest grossing movie at the domestic box office this summer will be Deadpool and Wolverine. And honestly, I don't feel completely confident with this prediction as I would if I was making this list a couple years back, because it's really hard to tell how the general audience's relationship with the current meta humor we have in movies is these days. In some ways, I think we're kind of past a lot of this commentary that the original Deadpool film offered us, but at the same time, every trailer and marketing that has been released for this film has caused a lot of conversations online, and hey, who isn't excited to see Hugh Jackman back as Wolverine? My biggest concern is that the Deadpool films kind of max out in the $320 to $360 million range, and we usually see the number 1 summer film much higher than that. But when I look at the other contenders for this summer, I don't really see anything that's gonna top this one. Number 2, I'm gonna go with Inside Out 2. This is another tricky one because what is the nostalgia level for Inside Out at right now? I feel like Inside Out kind of hits this middle ground. For a lot of movie people, the analogy of emotions being actual characters is a little too obvious and on the nose, but at the same time, for little kids, is that really what they're going to be interested in? Or do they just want to go see minions run around? It seems like it's this perfect middle ground that I'm curious how big that audience actually is. And I'm not trying to downplay the success of the first one at all. In fact, that's why it is so high on this list. That with the combination of Pixar always having successful sequels. Finding Dory ended up being the highest grossing film of its summer. And Incredibles 2 also topped its way to, I want to say, second or third. Even Elemental, a film that was initially considered a failure on its opening weekend, ended up with just over $300 million. So the Pixar brand is still strong, so that's why I'm going to place this at number 2. Number 3 is going to go to Despicable Me 4, and I did have trouble placing this at 2 or 3. But looking at the previous releases, I do think this has potential to kind of get in the mid 300 million range, and who knows what the Gentle Millions are up to these days. I just know you never want to bet against a viral meme or animated franchises that are targeted for children. Number 4 might be my most bold prediction. I am going to go Bad Boys, Ride or Die, which is clearly a memorable title for me. I'm gonna be honest, this film looks really good. That's one of the biggest reasons I have it placed so high, is because this actually is a franchise that I'm not particularly interested in, but when I saw the trailer, I said, I need to see that. But this one is really hard to tell how far it's gonna go. The last Bad Boys film technically was the highest grossing film of 2020, which I shouldn't have to explain why that happened. But even back in 2003 when we got the second one, it still made a decent amount of money. This is definitely a Hail Mary, and I'm really counting on the star power that is Will Smith, which could come back to get me, which is why I do think this is one of my more bold picks. But speaking of bold picks, I have the Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes at number 5. And for this to reach number 5, it will have to do considerably better than the last 3 did, which is something I think could happen because for whatever reason, the hype around this one seems much more high than any of the previous installments. It's also released early enough in the summer where I think it could have decent legs compared to other films released later in the season. Number 6 is going to be Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. This is another one that's a little difficult to predict because the previous one was sort of a surprise for a lot of people, at least for the quality of it. It still wound up making $154 million, but I think if people knew how good it was actually going to be, I think that number would be a lot higher. And so that's what I'm counting on, especially with the star power of Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth. It's got the big Memorial Day weekend release, and I think it is expected to do much better than Fury Road. Number 7 is A Quiet Place Day One. Another film in a franchise that needs to do better than the previous 2. Which if I'm saying that for every single one of these films, at least I'm in good company, kind of putting them all against each other. I don't really know what to expect with this one. I mean, the tone is much different than the previous ones, and we're slightly losing some of that star power with, at least initially, Emily Blunt and John Krasinski not really being in this one, and also a different director. So it's really hard to tell how audiences will receive it, but I do know there's a lot of love for this franchise, so I do feel comfortable putting it around this position. Number 8 is going to go to Twisters. Maybe just because I'm a sucker for any time Glenn Powell is in a Lego sequel. This one is essentially impossible to compare to the previous film, Twister, but when that one came out, it did make $241 million domestic, and so part of me feels like I'm a fool for putting it this low, but really one of the biggest reasons is because the following weekend is when Deadpool and Wolverine come out. And so if I'm expecting that movie to top the entire summer, I can't really expect a strong second weekend from Twisters. And if I was just predicting my most anticipated films, this would definitely be on that list, especially since it's directed by Lee Isaac Chung, who previously did Minari. It just feels like a combination of a lot of weird things being put together, and so I'm definitely hyped for it. Number 9 is The Fall Guy, and this one is another one that's tough to predict because there's not really a lot we can compare it to other than just the star power of Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, which, let me be clear, I do believe is enough to make this so much money. And I could be an absolute fool for putting it this low, especially because it has the first weekend of the summer box office. If this gets a positive word of mouth, which it already kind of has from a lot of critics, I think this could have incredible legs to even make decent money going into late June, early July. It's just usually risky to bet on a movie that isn't based on any IP or existing franchise, and this happens to be the only one on my list that qualifies for those two things. So going to number 10, I have Garfield the movie, which I'm not jazzed about having an animated kids film this low on the list, but I'm just not confident that kids are as excited to see Chris Pratt play Garfield as they are to see more Minions in another Pixar sequel. It's also sharing the opening weekend with Furiosa, which I don't necessarily see the audience of those two films crossing over, but if it did have its own weekend, I think that would attract more audiences to go see it. So for all those reasons, this is going to land at number 10. So there's my top 10. I do have 3 more honorable mentions, or as the film cast likes to call them, dark horses. And these are essentially films that I think could make the top 10, even though I'm not officially putting them in my ranking. I have the new Alien film Romulus, and this one I just didn't feel comfortable putting it in the top 10 because the previous Alien films just didn't make all that much money. That, along with it having a mid-August release, giving it just about 3 or 4 weeks to make enough money to crack the top 10, I just don't think it's going to happen. The second dark horse pick I have is Back to Black, the Amy Winehouse biopic, which is a film I'm not looking forward to, and it doesn't really feel like a lot of people are, but biopics have this weird thing to randomly make a lot of money sometimes, and people love the actual Amy Winehouse, so I just won't be shocked if this does end up making some money. And then finally, my third dark horse pick is Trap. M. Night Shyamalan with an incredible trailer, and outside of like The Sixth Sense, his films usually don't make a ton of money, but there's definitely a chance this could be a sensation, but just not quite enough to make me put it in the top 10, especially because it again has that August release. So there we go with my probably horrible predictions of the top 10 highest grossing films at the domestic box office. I would love to hear your predictions, so comment down below what you think is going to make the most money this coming summer. I think it's going to be a pretty great summer. There are a lot of films on this list that I'm excited for, and a lot more that weren't included in this list that I'm even more excited for. So let me know what you are looking forward to, and I will see you next time.